Good to go.
All right, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining our Tech Talk today. Today we have Lindsay Wardell who's going to talk about side projects, which is actually really important in you landing a tech job. So thank you for being here and take it away.
Awesome. Excited to be here. Just jump right in. My name is Lindsay Wardell, as was said, and my pronouns are she, her. I live in Portland, Oregon. I attended the Tech Academy in 2017 to 2018, kind of over the winter is when I was attending. I am currently a software engineer at NoRedInk. For those who don't know the name, NoRedInk is an education company focusing on building tools for teachers to teach English and writing to middle and high schoolers. It was founded by an English teacher, I believe in 2012, who started out with the premise of, I really need some software. Maybe I can find a developer or two to build something for me. And it has since grown into a company that is used across the United States and outside as well. I've also participated in a number of podcasts. I used to be the co-host on a show called Views on Vue, which focuses on the Vue.js framework and the community around that, as well as the Modern Web Podcast, which is hosted by This.Labs and This.Media. Both of those are excellent podcasts if you're wanting to get into front-end web development specifically. Obviously, Views on Vue is a little more biased towards the Vue.js framework. But Modern Web talks about everything, as you can see in its logos. So we are going to be talking today about side projects. And I just want to dive first into my own experience with side projects, because when I was at the Tech Academy, I heard speakers come in and they talk about high-level things that were really exciting, but I really appreciate the stories and the narratives of people who are actually in the industry. So that's where I want to start with myself. So as I graduated the Tech Academy, I had two questions. What am I going to learn? And what am I going to build? When I had been attending the Tech Academy, it was, I think there was only a single track, and it was very focused on C#, .NET, ASP, and very, very focused in that direction. And so when I was thinking, what am I going to learn? I was like, well, I already know .NET. This is something I'm familiar with at this point. In my Googling around as I'd been at the Tech Academy, I'd heard about this thing called React. And that looked interesting. It looked like something that was kind of competing with jQuery in the same space, wasn't 100% certain. But then I also heard about Vue. And then I heard about Angular. I was like, oh no, there's all of these different things that are covering the same topic. Oh, wait, what's TypeScript? Is that JavaScript? How do I use this? I don't understand. Node, ooh, I can use JavaScript on the back end. That sounds really nice. So I can have a single language across the entire stack. Ooh, I can write desktop applications using Electron. Oh, wait, there's other frameworks out there too. There's Laravel, there's Flutter if I want to build mobile applications. There's Java. Java's been around forever. Should I learn Java? What about Swift? Oh, I don't have a Mac. What am I going to do? So I decided to just cut it down, because if you keep looking at all of the technologies, there's way too much. There's always a new one coming out. It's an overwhelming feeling. So I just cut it down to two things I was going to learn after I graduated from the Tech Academy, and that was going to be Node.js and Vue. Like I said, Node is a backend implementation of JavaScript, so you can write all of your code front to back in JavaScript, which is really nice. And Vue is a front-end framework for building reactive applications. So if these are the technologies I'm going to use, how am I going to learn this? And just I mentioned this briefly, but Vue is a progressive JavaScript framework, and here's a snippet of Vue code. So looking at this, we have basically some standard HTML where we have a script block. We're importing this thing called ref, which allows us to have reactive variables in JavaScript. We're initiating it to a count of 0. And then we have an increment and decrement function that just adds and reduces as we would normally do. We have a button where we can say @click. Instead of having to add an event listener manually, we can just use @click inside of the HTML, and it calls decrement. And then we're displaying our count inside of these curly quotes or these curly brackets. So this is what Vue looks like today. It didn't look like this back in 2018. It was a little different. But I was very intrigued. This felt like a good direction to go. So I was thinking to myself, how am I going to learn this? Am I going to write a to-do app? Am I going to what project am I going to create? Because I wanted something that was interesting to me, not just something that I was following on a tutorial. I had already been following something on a tutorial and I wanted to build something myself. So I decided to make a game. I had been working on this card game. It's called Star Commander. I'd been working on it since 2010, just writing up the rules, trying to put together the cards and pieces. But I never had a way to actually play because it was all in Google Sheets and Google Docs and kind of theory. So I decided to put the time and energy in, and I put together a basic prototype of this game that I've been working on so that I could test it with my latest rule set. And that was fun. It was a lot of work because I was a brand new developer. This is not something I had ever written before. This isn't anything that I had ever conceived writing myself. But I learned a lot about local area networks and connecting two computers together and how to do multiplayer and drag and drop in HTML. Whole bunch of different technologies that I would never have experienced building just business applications or to-do apps. So it was really cool, but it was also really exhausting. And eventually I had painted myself into a corner where I couldn't do much with it because the scope was so large and I was a newer developer. But that's okay. I learned a lot about Vue. I learned a lot about those technologies, and that's been able to push my career forward as I've progressed through different jobs. But it didn't stop there. Vue is awesome, but React is also very popular. So as I was sitting there, I'd finished that game, more or less. How am I going to learn React? I'd gone through some tutorials. I'd written a to-do app, basics like that. But how am I actually going to really dive in and learn this? And I decided, oh, wait, let's look at React. I forgot I had added a slide, my bad. So with React, you import React and you define in Vue, going back here, we were looking at it as HTML template, basically, where we have a script in our HTML block. In React, it's all a single function. And it uses this structure, react.useState, to create some local state that will be reactive in our application. Increment and decrement function uses setCount instead of manipulating the variable ourselves. And then we're able to return JSX, which kind of looks like HTML, but isn't, within our JavaScript. This is not syntax that would actually work in the browser. If anyone is learning JavaScript at the moment, this is not something you could just type into your web browser or open a .js file and do. It requires a compile step. But it is pretty powerful for integrating your templating language into your logic. So that's what React looks like. And I decided, let's make a game. I did not feel like rewriting the entire card game because that was a lot of work and I didn't feel the need. It wasn't exciting at that point. So I came up with a more basic game where I could render a grid, I could render some towns, I could render some castles, and then I built some units and I could move them around. And eventually I was able to explore building a basic AI that could do the same things. And I started playing against my own AI, which was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot about React this way. I was able to learn about the different kinds of components you can build, how to manage state, a little more about functional programming, because React uses a more functional model than Vue, for example. And so this was the first iteration of this game, and it was the second time that I'd used a game to learn a technology, and it felt really good. So after I'd finished this game, I again painted myself into a bit of a corner because I was still just learning, and that's okay. That's one of the things I want to reiterate as we go through this talk, that it's okay to accidentally get painted into a corner on side projects. That's kind of what they're there for, is to learn, find the boundaries, and then figure out how you can do better in the next time. One of the boundaries I ran into is I had a lot of JavaScript files. JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, and I was having trouble keeping track of what different objects were supposed to look like, what data was available, things like that. So I started thinking about TypeScript. And I wondered, how am I going to learn this? for those who are not aware, TypeScript is basically JavaScript, but it adds types. So if you look at this and you know JavaScript, it should be familiar. The difference here being we have defined a type of counter where a value is a number. So anything after the colon defines the type of that thing. And then increment is a function that returns a counter. And decrement is also a function that returns a counter. And then when we create our counter object, we can say it's supposed to be a counter. So as we're typing this out, if we don't finish defining it, the TypeScript compiler will tell us, hey, wait, you left off increment or decrement or something, or you're not returning the correct value. And that's extremely helpful when you're working across a large code base and you don't need to hold it all in your head. The code is able to describe to you what the data is supposed to be. So as I was looking at this and I was learning TypeScript, it's like, okay, I've got a basic understanding. I think I can do this. What am I going to build? Let's make a game. So in this case, rather than building it in the browser, I just wanted to focus on TypeScript. So what I did was I built a CLI, command line interface, to play the game. I rewrote the entire engine in TypeScript. I made it so that multiple players could be played. That was one of the corners I had painted myself into. And I made it so there was a lot more flexibility. And it was a lot of fun. Not only did I learn TypeScript, but I also learned how to write a command line application. And I learned in JavaScript specifically. This is all in Node since I was using TypeScript. I was also able to learn about doing colors and receiving user input. Also, I made my code more modular and testable because the intent for this was to then take the engine and plug it into React or Vue or any other front-end framework. So I needed an engine that was modular in that way, that could just be plugged into whatever. And it really helped just my understanding of how to architect an application. But then as I was working on that, I learned from listening to a podcast of this language called Elm. I'm assuming most of you have not heard of Elm. When I heard it on a podcast, they described it as TypeScript on hard mode. So I definitely don't recommend reaching for it immediately, except I love it and you absolutely should. But you should probably stick to JavaScript for now. Let's look at a little bit of Elm. It is a delightful language for reliable web applications. It is a functional programming language as opposed to JavaScript or C#, which are object-oriented. So it compiles to JavaScript, so it still runs in the browser. Looking at this code, though, it looks a little different. So instead of having objects or variables that we were just manipulating and updating and calling functions on, we have this initialize function, which just returns a 0. We have a message type, which is either increment or decrement. And we have this update function where it receives a message, either increment or decrement, and a model, and returns a model. And then it just checks to see if message is increment, we return model +1. If it's decrement, we return model -1. And then the view looks really weird. You can see that it's referencing some HTML-like things. And that's really what it is. These are functions that generate HTML. Is Elm a pure functional programming language like Scheme or Lisp? Yes, Elm is a pure functional programming language. And it was specifically designed for building web applications in the browser. Its direct inspiration is from Haskell. Haskell is another functional programming language that you can see. And the syntax is very similar to that. And Evan Czaplicki, the creator of Elm, drew a lot of inspiration from it. Actually, the Elm compiler is written in Haskell. So this looks a lot different from anything we were looking at. Let's just jump back to the TypeScript. Like this is TypeScript. This is straight JavaScript. We're manipulating values, returning things. Elm is a lot different, to put it mildly. I was really curious. Can I define a functional programming language? A functional programming language is a language that encourages not mutating data directly and avoiding side effects. There are a few great talks. I'll pull up these references once I get to the end. There's a few talks by Richard Feldman, who also works at NoRedInk, where he defines what a functional programming language is. and kind of goes a little more in depth on that. I would definitely recommend checking those out. But the gist of functional programming is you want to avoid mutation. So for example, right here, this is mutating this dot value. We're directly changing it. And same thing here. Functional programming encourages not doing that, and instead going through this loop of I've changed my data and now I call my, in this case, my user interface again and regenerate the entire thing by using an entire new object instead of manipulating things bit by bit. The other thing is avoiding side effects. So in this case, actually, we'll go back to the TypeScript code. In this case, we've got our counter here, and we've initialized it. We can call increment and decrement. There is nothing that stops us from just outside of this code block calling counter.value equals 6, for example. We could just do that. But that's a side effect. That's not the intended path that the code is going through. So in functional programming, that is either discouraged or outright forbidden. So in Elm, for example, that's impossible. The only way that we can change our model is by returning a new model. We cannot manipulate this anywhere else. So that's the difference between a functional programming language and either an imperative or object-oriented programming language. But I'll pull up those talks as reference for later. So all of that said, a little bit of context on Elm. This was really interesting to me, and I wanted to explore it more and understand how can this help me? It felt really cool. It felt really interesting. How can I use this? Well, I thought about it, and I had an idea. I bet you'll never guess what it was. Let's make a game. So I took the existing concept I had written in React and TypeScript, and I rewrote it in Elm. So in this case, because I was rewriting the entire logic in a different programming language, that modular TypeScript engine wasn't going to work. But because I had done that effort, I was able to follow my logic and rewrite the entire thing into the Elm language. It took a lot of work and it took a lot of mental shift to understand what was going on and why, because functional programming is a lot different from imperative or object-oriented programming. But once I was able to get over some of those hurdles, I could feel the power that this language was giving me, and I was able to get the game to a state that is, it's the most advanced version of the game that I've written so far. And I don't feel painted into the corners that I'd had before, because I'd had those experiences, not because of the language specifically, although the language helps a lot, but because I'd had those experiences working on the previous versions. So why, just wrapping this up, why the same project? One, same core logic. I didn't have to think about what I was doing as much because I knew I'm going to write this game. I'd already done it once. I had it in my head. I could just think, how do I do this thing in that language or that framework? It's an interesting project. I have personally, I lose interest just following tutorials and doing a to-do app or building a hamburger builder or what have you that tutorials offer. So for me, having something that's really interesting that I can just dig into is important. And building this game is something that I am very interested in. As some context for myself, the original reason I got into programming was I started getting interested in video game design in like elementary and middle school, as many kids do. And I started exploring making fan games for Sonic the Hedgehog. Eventually, I got into web design instead and decided that was way cooler than building games. But I still have that interest in the game development side. So for me, building a game is interesting. And it also gave me the freedom to learn. Instead of just following this rote plan, I was able to follow whatever was interesting. So in the latest version of the game, I've been trying to update the graphics. I've added more music using the audio API. I've recently added a graph so that you can see how each player was doing score-wise as the game progressed. It's really fun to look at the end of the game. So just lots of little things like that. I had the freedom to learn and explore whatever was interesting to me. And the best part of doing the exact same project over and over, you can see your own progress as you go. So in the first version in React, this was my basic UI. That's using Bootstrap 4, I believe. And I can look at the code, I can look at the UI, I can see it. That's the game I wrote. But it's not as polished as it's become. And same thing with the TypeScript version. I could see my progress. I could see how much I'd learned. And then with the Elm version, it's fantastic. And obviously, it's not done. There's a long way for it to go before I could put it up on an app store or anything. I want to add better graphics. I want to get a lot more done. But it's coming along. And if anyone's interested in playing it, no, it won't let me hover over the link. It's at that URL there, geralin.lindsaykwardell.com. It is free to play, and it supports up to 8 players on a single computer, so it's not online multiplayer. But yeah, if you're interested, go have fun. So I've been talking about my own journey through side projects, and that's gotten me up to today. I've been working on that game specifically since leaving the Tech Academy, basically. So looking back, I can see 3 different kinds of side projects that I've worked on. There are learning projects, maintained projects, and slow cooker projects. If you want, you can use Crock-Pot or Instant Pot or something as well. Whatever slow metaphor you want to go with. So learning projects, and I'm going to use a metaphor of Lego building here. So learning projects are experiments intended for learning. So when you're building a Lego set, you're following set instructions. If you are somebody who's really into Legos, maybe you want the end model that it provides. But if you're somebody like my 6-year-old who is just exploring building, following the instructions is an experiment into itself. So you could be following a course, you could be following a tutorial. You could also just be doing whatever this is. I don't remember what I did, but I found this picture that I took when I was playing with my 6-year-old, and everything was sideways. And I think I was just having fun putting Legos in the wrong way. So it could be from following a tutorial or trying something out, but you don't expect it to last very long. Again, unless you're a Lego builder that like keeps the models, this was never going to last. It was intended for one play session, and then I assumed my 6-year-old was going to break it. So some examples of these could be to-do apps, consuming public APIs, trying out a new framework. It's just some small bit of code that you're able to sit down and understand what's going on and get a feel for it. It's never something that's meant to last forever. Another kind is the maintained projects. So maintained projects, here's a couple nice Lego setups. They're intended as more long-running projects. Obviously, this came from a Reddit. This one is from Google. These are neither mine. But both of these individuals put time and effort into building these things. They are not intended to just be taken apart the next day. They're typically small, like the one on the right, but not always. They could be larger. They're very useful in a portfolio. If you're wanting to show it off to coworkers, some cool new concept, or you're showing it to a future employer. Hey, this is something that I've built. This is something that I can do. This is something I am proud of. Some examples of these could include blogs, open source projects, or small sites. So just as a few examples of my maintained projects as I define them. This is a library, Natural Order, which you can find on NPM. NPM is the node package manager. And it's just Natural Order. And when I was working at a company in 2019, had to think of the year, I ran into an issue where in JavaScript, and you'll notice this in Excel and a whole bunch of different applications as well. If you have a list of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you hit sort, what you will end up with is 1, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because it's looking at them just alphabetically. And so the ones all get put together, the twos all get put together. And it's extremely frustrating when you're trying to order things naturally. So I put together this. I patched it together from a library that just ordered a list of numbers or strings, and I enabled it to handle objects. So now this is an open source project that I maintain and I use in my own projects, but I also can have it on my portfolio and say, this is something that I built that I am proud of. npm. Let me, 1 second, npmjs.com. I'm just going to put the link straight to it in the chat. There is the link to the package I was talking about. Lost my train of thought. Give me 1 second. Oh, so while I was building this, I was able to solve this specific problem. I extracted it out into a package so I could use it across multiple things. Now it's sitting in my portfolio. I've also used it as a learning project. So before, I didn't use a compiler. Then I switched it to Typescript, and I was able to add the Typescript compiler. Then a coworker suggested compiling it in a different way so that it could work in the browser or without having to be compiled through Node. And at this point, I'm using a building tool called Vite.js. And I'm putting that one in the chat as well, vitejs.dev. And I've been able to add tests, and I'm adding CI/CD for continuous integration. So it's become its own learning project at this point. It doesn't need a lot of work. It does everything I need it to do, but it's something I can maintain long-term and refer back to and use in my projects as needed. Another one is this project, Elmview Bridge. This one has a bit more documentation behind it, as in this is a picture from the documentation. But the goal of the project was I wanted to render Elm applications inside of Vue.js because I'd been using Vue.js for years and I wanted to try out Elm. And I figured this might be helpful for other people. So I wrote up some documentation. You can find this. I'll put this one in the chat as well at elmviewbridge.lindsaykwardell.com. And you can see the documentation there. The library itself has been a great success for me because I've been able to experiment with Vue in different ways as well as Elm. And this is something that I think will be beneficial to other people, so I released it publicly. Bare minimum, it's a fun experiment, but it's something that I want to maintain long-term. Another great benefit of having these maintained projects is being able to talk about them. So although this is a small thing, I put together a template so that you could use Elm inside of Vite, again, vitejs.dev. And this is just a template that brings together a bunch of different technologies so that you can build an Elm application as smoothly as possible using Vite. And I've just provided it publicly as an open source project. It gets talked about in the Elm community, gets talked about sometimes in the Vite community, not as much. They're very much into JavaScript. But it's something that I can say I did, and it is an open source contribution that I made. It's small. It's something I maintain, and I enjoy it. And that's really the benefit. Is this is something with your name on it that you can be proud of when you're talking to employers, when you're talking to other developers. This is something that I do. One last one is, I mentioned blogging. There is this fantastic site called dev.to, if you've not heard of it. And it is somewhere that anyone can sign up, anyone can write a blog, and anyone can follow anyone else. So it becomes kind of this social blogging experience, which is really cool. Typically what I do is I'll write the blog post on my personal site. As you can see here, it's originally published at lindsaykwardell.com. But then I will post it onto dev2 as well and link back. Most of what I'm posting is just fun stuff that I found interesting. But in this case, I was exploring moving my blog itself from Nuxt to Astro. Astro being a static site generator to build the HTML pages for me, Nuxt being a different way of doing that, basically, in this case. Having a blog and having your own personal site is a tremendous way to build your own experience and knowledge of how to build other sites, because you can just rewrite it as much as you want. Who's going to complain? You're the owner. This is something for you, by you, and you can try out as many technologies as you want and find what works best for you. And best of all, as I discovered with this blog post, a lot of other people are interested in the same thing because they're all rewriting their blogs too. Becomes a common joke on Twitter, actually, of time to rewrite my blog. So this was a nice blog post to write that kind of tied into that and got a lot of people interested in Astro. And I need to click on that window to make it go. So that's some of the maintained projects. And now I'd like to talk about Slow Cooker. And Slow Cooker are massive projects. They are the playgrounds of ambition. So if you had an idea and you think it can revolutionize this industry and it's going to have all of these different features and it's going to do this thing, because there are some competitors out there, but none of them have been doing it this way. And I think it'll really make a difference. Maybe it will. This is a slow cooker project, especially since you're at the Tech Academy. I'm going to presume most of you are newer in this industry. You might not have all the experience to build that super awesome thing, but that's okay. The whole point of these slow cooker projects is to try it out, expand it, grow it a little bit at a time. You may not have a polished result for years. You may never have a polished result. That's not the point. The point is you're spending this time and energy detailing all of these intricacies of this application or this project that you have in mind. And all of those skills come into play when you have a software development job. So when I'm at work, I promise to keep it secret. Yes. What was I saying? Oh, when I'm at work, for example, I'll just share, I don't have a picture for this one, but I was working on improving the search experience at NoRedInk so that teachers would be able to find our writing assignments through the search. Right now, it was only finding certain kinds of assignments. We wanted them to find the writing assignments as well. So I spent weeks just breaking all of it down and trying to find the best way to do it. And that skill is something that needs to be learned through experience. So having a big project like this, building a Twitter clone, building a Facebook clone, building a messaging app, building an RSS reader, I don't know, pick something. But it's something big, it's something interesting to you, and just the experience of working on it will be beneficial to your career, even if you never have anything that you can put into your portfolio that says you did that. Just having that skill is going to do a lot of good for you. So I'll use my slow cooker example here. This is that game I was working on since the Tech Academy. And this is the version in Elm that I showed you earlier. And this is what it looked like 1 year ago. So this was by no means a finished product. This one is a lot nicer. This is still by no means a finished product. And I intend to keep working on this thing as long as it's interesting. Maybe I'll get it to the point that I can release it and maybe sell it on the marketplace or something, but that's not the point. The point is it's something I can explore. I can think about ideas. I can try out new concepts, and I can figure out how to fit those things into an existing application. The card game that I showed here as well is another example. I had been working, this isn't programming, obviously, but I just want to drive home this idea of having a long-term side project. I started this game in 2010 when I was at camp. And that's when I really started writing down the rules and exploring what this would look like. And last month, I was able to play with a paper copy of it. It is this close to being done. But even if I never made it to the finish line, I'm so excited about how much progress I made and how much I learned in building a game through that experience. So that is the benefit of slow cooker projects. And if you can, as some do, if you can get your slow cooker project out the door, make it as a startup, just like the founder of NoRedInk in this case, congratulations, that's phenomenal. You did something amazing. But even if you don't, that's okay. It's still phenomenal. You did something amazing. And that's really where I want to wrap this up, is as a friendly reminder, nobody's forcing you to work on your side projects. A lot of times on Twitter, I'm seeing, especially junior developers, lamenting that I've got like 300 side projects I'm working on. I can't get any of it done, and I want to do this new thing. It's okay. It really is. Nobody's making you work on it. And if you don't want to work on it anymore, then guess what? It just released at minimum, it just released to the public. It's a minimum viable product. It's complete. So don't feel guilty that you're sitting on side projects that aren't complete or you still need to do or something's waiting. It's okay. Go do something you enjoy. And I think Siri just thought I was saying something. So I'm going to wrap up with Miss Frizzle. And for those who know this quote, it will be enjoyable. But for those who don't, what Ms. Frizzle says to her students is take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. And that is exactly what side projects are for. And as an added benefit, if you do it in public, it will draw the attention of recruiters. It will draw the attention of companies where you want to work. And it'll be a fantastic way to jumpstart your career. So on that, what are you going to build next? And that is my talk.
Great talk, Lindsay.
Awesome. Sorry, my mic was not working for a second. Awesome talk. That was really informative. I see that Angela already has a question. Is there somewhere you recommend to publish your projects to if you do want feedback or people to notice?
Yeah, so there are a handful of really good places to go. I'm sure there's more than a handful, but I only know a handful. The internet is big. If you're looking for feedback on a very specific technologies, for example, Vue or React, actually the subreddits for those frameworks and languages are excellent places to get feedback. You can say, hey, I'm new to this technology. I just built this thing. What do you think? A couple other places that I would recommend and again, I'm coming very much from the JavaScript ecosystem when I say this. So I can't speak as much to C# or Ruby and any of those other languages. But if you're looking for feedback on a JavaScript application, there are a lot of different Discords that you can go to. The one that I participate in the most is called dev.lunch. Actually, lunch.dev, not dev.lunch. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to confirm that. Lunch.dev. Put that in the chat as well. And that is run by Michael Chan, also known as Chantastic. He used to be the host of the React podcast. And it is just a phenomenal place. You can get feedback. You can ask people's opinions. It's very supportive, both of new developers and existing ones, as people are trying out different technologies. So that is a place I would recommend. A couple other ones, I don't have links for them, unfortunately. There's JS Horse, which is another similar community, but significantly larger. You can also, there's a few different tech people out there who have their own Discords, and there's different Discords for certain frameworks. So Vue, for example, has its own official Discord channel. Vite.js has its own Discord channel. React has its own Discord channel. Angular has its own. So you can also get feedback and support there. So those are some of the ones I would recommend. Twitter is also a good place to connect with developers in a more ephemeral way. It's Twitter. You can't build too much there at once. But that is definitely a place that I go personally to say, hey, I'm working on this thing. What do you think? So those are my recommendations.
Great. Larry has another question. So what do you do when you want to implement a feature in your project, but you have no idea where to start or get stuck? What resources do you use? For example, for your game projects, how do you know what to code? Do you have a roadmap?
So I try to break all of my projects down into very small bits and go from there. So with the game, for example, the first 3 things that I knew I needed to do was, first I needed to render a 9x9 grid. So I figured out how to render a 9x9 grid. Then I needed to randomize what was inside the 9x9 grid. And then I needed to figure out how to manipulate the data so that I could move pieces around in the 9x9 grid. So that's how I broke that down. And the next steps after that were, it was less I'm stuck on this particular thing. It was, oh, this feature sounds cool. I'll use the audio API as an example. I think it would be really cool to add music to this or sound effects. How can I do that? So when I reach a point like that, again, it depends on the language, and I'm very much in JavaScript. I recommend the MDN docs, MDN Mozilla Developer Network, I believe is what it is. There's the link. And that has references on everything you would ever need to know on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So typically when I'm trying to learn something, that is the location that I'm going to go. If I need a blog or a tutorial, often I will go to dev.to and see if anyone's written a blog post on it. Or I will go onto YouTube and see if there are videos on it. There are a number of great JavaScript developers on YouTube who are putting out courses and information. One of them that I can name is Maximilian Schwarzmüller, who runs the Academind YouTube channel. He does a phenomenal job of exploring different technologies, including React, Vue, Flutter, React Native, if you want to build mobile applications, Laravel. He does everything. He does a bit of everything, and he's got a handful of courses on Udemy as well. Another one, if you want to get into Vue specifically, since that was my niche, I just blanked on the name. Eric Hanchett, I believe, is the name. He does a lot of YouTube stuff as well. Also, Luke Diebold. So those are a few of the resources that I would recommend going to, as far as learning anything in general.
Awesome. Great resources. Are there any other questions, by the way? Feel free to ask them in here. But also, if you can't think of any, oh, it looks like James has a question.
Hang on.
Great.
Yeah, I need to unmute the mic, so give me one moment. All right, go ahead with your question, James.
Hey, is my mic okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. First, thank you for sharing your journey, Lindsay, and everyone for making this event happen. So I really appreciate it because I'm just starting out my journey as a software engineer. I just finished Bootcamp in April for 3 months and starting from ground zero. So I'm really excited. So it's great to hear your journey. It inspires me to keep going, keep learning, and being fearless like you have been. So that's my gratitude. And my question is about projects and recruiters. So I hear that having a lot of projects is probably the most important thing besides networking in our portfolio to make us stand out more. What if I have projects that are incomplete? Should I display that anyways? And would recruiters kind of look down on that? Or how do I approach this whole kind of like, hey, look at my kind of projects, and if it's not really finished, is it still merited to kind of display? Or yeah, so if I have so if I have an incomplete project and like I do have the conception and idea going on, but it's just like I'm struggling with my code because I'm still trying to learn TypeScript, for example, and it's just not rendering as I want it, so I'm not really proud of it. Do I still want to show that to a recruiter or anyone that's hiring, for example?
Thank
you.
I think the way I would approach that is if you're still building out your portfolio, I think it's perfectly fine to have things that are work in progress. So in your case, where you have that project that isn't completely finished and you're not fully proud of it, if that's what you're working on right now, if that is something that you feel comfortable saying, this is something I'm working on, but this is how I approach projects, this is how I work on things, I feel like that's still valuable to a recruiter. Recruiters don't necessarily need the most polished things, but they need something that they can look at and say, okay, this person knows what they're doing. So that's how I would approach that. For myself at this point, I have about 6 different projects that I talk about. So I actually talked about most of them here. But that's what I would talk about to recruiters as well. As I have these libraries, I have these applications, and everything that I do at this point is basically all stored on GitHub publicly. I don't tend to put anything on a private repo. So if a recruiter wants to see more of what I've done, then I will go and look. Then they will go and look, not me. I will say, from me personally, and this is unique to NoRedInk, our engineering team is very involved in the interviewing process. So when a candidate applies to NoRedInk, I will often look to see if they have a link to their GitHub, and I'll take a look. I don't go in depth. I tend to look, what's the languages that they use? What kind of code do they write? What's interesting to them? So I feel like having everything on GitHub speaks to that. And so somebody like me could then see, oh, you're into TypeScript, you're into, I'm going to make assumptions, and if they're not you, then it's not you. But TypeScript or React or something like that, that could be helpful for a recruiter or an interviewer. But it doesn't necessarily need, not everything needs to be your portfolio. I hope that helps and makes sense.
Thank you. It makes sense.
Awesome. That was a great question, James. I was always wondering about that. I know that like throughout our bootcamp, we do have a lot of projects. Maybe not every single project can be on there, but maybe the bigger picture ones are definitely great to put on your GitHub and showcase those. All right, let's see if we have any more questions. I can also reshare Lindsay's LinkedIn with you guys. Is that a good way to contact you, Lindsay?
LinkedIn is fine. I am also pretty active on Twitter.
Oh, okay. Let me find your Twitter account, but I know that sometimes I kind of forget to ask questions or can't think of anything, but then afterwards I kind of remember stuff. So
yeah, it's on the screen right there.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So on Twitter, GitHub, personal site, basically anywhere that I have a presence, it's going to be Lindsay K. Wardell.
So, all right. So also, I just wanted to let you guys know about next week's Tech Talk. We actually have one of our other graduates joining us, and they're going to be talking about maintaining mental health as a software developer. So especially like going through the bootcamp process and like trying to land a job. So they're going to be talking about that, and I put a link in the chat box where you can check that out in RSVP if you're interested. We're also recording this talk right now, and we're going to be posting it on our YouTube channel on our Tech Talk playlist. And here's the link to that. And you guys can watch this either later today or tomorrow. But yeah, so thank you all for joining. I hope you guys had a great time here, learned a lot. Thank you, Lindsay, so much for doing an awesome presentation. And I hope you guys have a lovely evening.
Yeah, great talk. Great talk, Lindsay. Great presentation. And definitely want to know when you're going to release that game so we can play it.
Yes.
What do you, one last question, Lindsay. Have you ventured into NFTs, and what do you see with virtual reality gaming coming up?
I do not touch NFTs. It is not my interest. Let's put it that way. As far as virtual reality gaming, it seems interesting. I'm inclined more towards what we've seen before than something all-encompassing like the metaverse. So my personal preference, if I was to put on a virtual headset, would be I can put it on temporarily, do a game, and take it off, and not have to think about that place anymore.
Understood. Yeah. Great talk, Lindsay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, actually, real quick, since you gave that to me, there is, if anyone is interested, a virtual reality API for the browser. So that is something that you can look into in JavaScript if you wanted to. I have never played with it. I don't know how comfortable it is to use, but I know it exists.
We will check it out for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you guys hopefully next week. And thank you again, Lindsay.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.